Being free from material constraints, you become a celestial being. Siefing, eating, clothing, shelter, transportation, birth, aging, illness, and death are all manifestations of material constraints. If a person is no longer bound by material concerns, they will be free from the troubles, pains, worries, and fears associated with these aspects of life. And that is what it means to be a celestial being. Reflecting on our past and observing those around us, we discover that most people spend their entire lives toiling and laboring, with the majority of their time devoted to material pursuits: eating, clothing, shelter, transportation, birth, aging, illness, and death. We worry about what to eat, what to wear, where to live, and the inevitability of aging, illness, and death. We are almost entirely bound by material concerns, dominating our thoughts and consciousness, causing us to overlook completely the true purpose of coming to this world. The so-called material constraints do not mean that material possessions bind our thoughts and actions. Rather, it is that our consciousness falls into the trap formed by materialism. When we spend our entire lives pursuing and possessing material wealth while forgetting about the elevation of life, we are bound by materialism. For example, because we have physical bodies, we need to eat. However, eating is not the purpose of life. If we spend our days thinking about what to eat and working diligently to obtain food, then we are bound by food. Similarly, the purpose of earning money is to obtain more and better survival resources. But when our minds are consumed with thoughts of how to earn money and how to earn more money, then we are bound by money. In short, whatever we revolve around, we are bound by the things we revolve around. Freeing ourselves from material constraints does not mean rejecting material possessions altogether. It does not mean giving up food, housing, clothing, vehicles, medicines, tools, utensils, money, etc. Rather, it means that our thoughts, intentions, words, and actions no longer revolve around acquiring more material possessions and money, but instead revolve around something more enduring and eternal. Above the material world is the spiritual world. Above the spiritual world is the world of the soul. And above the world of the soul is the holographic world. Life is bound by what confines it, and life exists in that world. Life bound by materialism exists in the material world. Life bound by spirituality resides in the spiritual realm, and life bound by the soul resides in the world of the soul. People live in the material world. Celestial beings reside in the spiritual realm. Super celestial beings and Buddhas dwell in the world of the soul, while gods and the greatest creator inhabit the holographic realm. To become a celestial being, one must break free from material constraints and enter the spiritual world. To live in the spiritual world, one must possess nothing and no longer toil and labor for more and better material resources. In fact, there are many people in today's world who live in the spiritual world. Artists and scientists, for example, truly live in their artistic creations and scientific explorations, rather than in the pursuit of money and material goods. Monks and nuns in monasteries and Buddhist temples also live in the spiritual world. In the current space-time, almost all the Chanyuan celestials of the second home live in the spiritual world. They also strive to create material wealth, but this kind of creation is purely a natural behavior and an adjunct to life, not for the purpose of acquiring material wealth. Living in the spiritual world does not mean completely giving up the enjoyment that material possessions bring. Living in a villa is indeed more comfortable than living in an attic, and driving a luxury car is indeed more comfortable than driving a tractor. However, the greatest difference between life in the spiritual world and life in the material world lies in the fact that when people living in the material world live in a thatched hut, they will feel pain and anxiety because society's common values admire those who live in villas and look down upon those who live in thatched huts. It is difficult to find a wife and raise children when living in a thatched hut, so there will be countless worries and sorrows. On the other hand, people living in the spiritual world will not have worries and sorrows even if they live in a thatched hut. Allow me to provide a real example. At the Canadian headquarter of Life Chanyuan, there are 5 Crown of Chanyuan Celestials. They had a total income of only 100,000 Canadian dollars in 2023, which means each person received only 20,000 Canadian dollars for the entire year. The average annual income of individuals in Canada is over 43,000 Canadian dollars. In other words, The income of the 5 Crown Chanyuan Celestials is less than half of the average income of Canadians. Now, ask yourself, are those Canadians who earn over $40,000 a year living comfortably, or are the residents of the Life of Chanyuan, who earn only $20,000 a year, living more freely and contentedly? The answer is obvious. If a person earning a monthly income of less than $2,000, especially if they are renting a house, would find it difficult to survive. For example, in Vancouver, the monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment is no less than 1,600 Canadian dollars. If you earn 2,000 Canadian dollars a month and pay 1,600 Canadian dollars in rent, how can you live? However, the 5 Crown Chanyuan Celestials each receive only 1,660 Canadian dollars per month, and not only can they survive, but they also live very comfortably and freely. This stark difference illustrates the vastly different situations between people living in the material world and those living in the spiritual world. In fact, people living in the spiritual world often enjoy more material comforts than those living in the material world, which is the secret behind the higher quality of life and taste of celestial beings compared to ordinary people. This is the principle that unselfishness leads to self, and selflessness leads to fulfillment.